People don't underestimate you because you're weak. They underestimate you because you're harmless. And that, in Niccolo Machiavelli's eyes, is more dangerous than weakness itself. Because weakness can inspire empathy, but harmlessness inspires contempt. This is the truth that no one had the courage to tell you. They talk over you, ignore your ideas, push your boundaries, test your patience, and question your worth. Not because you are incapable, but because you have never given them reason to fear what you keep silent. Because you have never learned to hide your intentions. Because everything you feel is written on your face, exposed in your eyes, delivered in words spoken too quickly, to please too quickly. And Machiavelli already warned, the prince who shows everything he thinks, everything he feels, and everything he intends, has already lost before he has even begun. You have been trained from an early age to be accepted before being respected. And this order comes at a price, because those who seek acceptance first almost never earn respect later. Smile, be nice, greet first. Don't confront, don't impose, be understanding, always be available, don't complicate, don't deconstruct, be clear, be sweet. Be good. But no one told you that these virtues, in excess and without strategy, become traps. And they become a language that says without words, they can use me, I can handle it. And that taught you something dangerous, that being good was enough. That being good was synonymous with value, that all you had to do was give yourself, open yourself up, surrender yourself, and the world would understand, respond, respect you. But that's not how it is, and it never was. The real world, the world as it is, not as it should be, does not reward the visible. It rewards the strategic. And Machiavelli knew this more than 500 years ago. The author of The Prince was not a cynic. He was a realist. He observed power the way a scientist observes disease, not with judgment but with precision. He knew that being too good, too visible, too predictable, was the shortest path to being manipulated, to being discarded, to being controlled. People who are too good do not generate fear. And where there is no fear, there is no limit. And where there is no limit, there is abuse. Machiavelli saw no evil in this. He saw human nature. He saw instinct. He saw calculation. Because when a being does not offer visible resistance, he is automatically repositioned as a step, as a bridge, as a means. Have you ever noticed this? Have you noticed how people only start respecting your boundaries after you walk away? Have you noticed how they only take you seriously when you stop explaining, when you stop responding, when you finally decide to disappear? This happens because you have ceased to be understandable. You have become absent, inaccessible, and human beings fear what they do not understand. Machiavelli knew this as few others did. He did not believe that strength lay in violence. Strength lies in the suggestion of what might happen if someone crosses the line. Strength lies in what you do not reveal, in what you keep silent, in what you do not give away. Most people don't want to know you. They want to know how much they can use you without losing your presence. And the more you show yourself, emotionally, verbally, physically, the more predictable you become. And the predictable can be controlled, and the controlled will never be respected. Now think about the times when you were understood too quickly, where everything you said was interpreted effortlessly. And think, how much did those people really value you after that? How much did they come back begging for your presence? Or once deciphered, did you become just another functional piece on someone's board? Excessive vulnerability is an open card for manipulation. And herein lies the dilemma. If you are not perceived as a potential threat, you are immediately repositioned as a tool, a means to someone's end. Machiavelli would never advise you to be cruel, but he would say, with all the calm of a strategist, stop being readable, stop being easy, stop being obvious. The world does not respect what it understands too much. The world fears what it cannot name. The mistake is not in being good. The mistake is in believing that being good is enough, that being transparent is a virtue, that showing everything you feel is authenticity, because it is not. Not always. Many times it is self-sabotage. You bare your soul in your first conversations. You explain your pain as if it were an invitation for understanding. You beg for empathy as if you were begging for crumbs. And the problem with this is not your sensitivity. The problem is that the world, most of the time, is not interested in understanding. It is interested in using. Machiavelli knew that the game of power begins before the first word. It begins in the aura, in the silence, in the containment, in what you do not allow to be accessed. What cannot be read cannot be manipulated. What cannot be predicted cannot be attacked. And what cannot be attacked begins to be respected. The question is, how much of what you feel is too visible? How much of what you want can be mapped out in a few conversations? How long does it take you to show everything you think? What if you were to be silent for a while? Not as a punishment, but as an experiment. What if you responded less? What if you spoke more slowly? What if you let others feel your absence even in your presence? What if you began to practice what Machiavelli would call strategic invisibility? Not the invisibility of the missing, but the invisibility of the enigma, the kind of silence that does not disappear but observes, that weighs, that disturbs, that demands caution, that imposes presence even in the absence of words. You will never be feared if you are predictable. You will never be respected if you are too emotionally accessible. You will never be admired if you are immediately understood. And there is no glory in being understood and dismissed in the same instant. Machiavelli would write today, if he were here, "The prince who is not feared will be betrayed by those who interpret his kindness as weakness." You don't have to become cruel. You have to become less obvious, less decipherable, less available. You have to stop being read like an open book and start being interpreted as a symbol, as a mystery, as a potential power. And perhaps the most disturbing question of all is, how many times have you been ignored because you explained too much? How many times has someone come back only after you disappeared? How many times have you been used because they said you were a good person? How many times have you been read as safe, and because of that, exploited to the point of exhaustion? If you want to be seen as someone of value, you need to understand what really scares you. It's not the shouting, it's the silence. It's not the threat, it's the doubt. It's not the anger, it's the absence. It's the pause between words. It's the unresponsive look, it's the strategic withdrawal. It's the unsaid. And that's why the good ones are often discarded, because they are understood too soon. They are too predictable. They show their hearts so urgently that they forget to protect their minds. And on the emotional battlefield, whoever shows their minds last wins. Machiavelli would not ask you to stop being who you are, but he would teach you to choose the right moment to be seen. Because in the theater of power, the shadow always comes before the light, and it is the shadow that announces respect. It is the shadow that creates tension. It is the shadow that forces others to move with caution. And maybe, just maybe, true respect is born the moment you stop introducing yourself and start being interpreted with care. But care is not begged for. Care is demanded. And this demand begins when you stop being harmless, when you stop being predictable, when you start to be read with fear. Are you ready for this? Because what comes next demands that you disappear before you are remembered. And when you are finally remembered, it will be not for what you showed, but for what you never allowed to be fully seen. The world is full of voices. People who shout, who justify themselves, who expose themselves. Everyone wants to be seen. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone wants to make it clear who they are, what they feel, what they think. And precisely for this reason, most people are not remembered. Because the more they talk, the more they become common. The more they explain, the more they lose their mystery. The more they give themselves away, the more they dissolve into the crowd. This is why Machiavelli saw silence as one of the most sophisticated weapons of power. Silence is not absence, it is selective presence. It is the decision not to offer easy answers. It is the strategy of not becoming predictable. When everyone wants to be interpreted, true power lies in being a question that no one can resolve. Have you ever walked into a room where someone didn't say anything, but seemed to be the center of the room? It wasn't their clothes or their expression. It was something invisible, a subtle tension in the air, a shared doubt. What is he thinking? Or worse, is he judging everything in silence? This is the effect of silent presence. It is what Machiavelli would call a strategic aura, the space between what is shown and what is hidden, the interval between action and reaction, the pause that paralyzes others, the silence that, instead of pushing away, attracts like a vacuum of interpretation. There is something almost magnetic about this. People who do not explain themselves immediately, who keep their gaze steady, who do not give in to the emotional rush of the environment, create around themselves a kind of invisible field. And within this field, the rules change. Time slows down. Words lose power. Because what controls the environment is no longer the sound, but the absence of it. And in the absence, what Machiavelli called strategic perception grows. The art of making others think twice before approaching, before judging, before trying to gauge your depth. Think about the times when you lost control of a conversation, when you tried to explain yourself too much, when you gave immediate answers on impulse, when you justified your feelings in order to be understood. What happened next? Did you feel like you dominated the environment, or that you were carried away by it? And more, did you feel that you were respected after your emotional surrender? Or did you feel like you lost something? Your posture, your strength, your authority? There is a huge difference between reacting and commanding. Reacting is instinct. Commanding is calculation. Reacting is emotional. Commanding is silent. When you react, you surrender your mind. When you observe, you protect your territory. Machiavelli knew this. That is why he wrote not only about what to do, but about when to do nothing, about the impact of a well-placed absence, about the value of being a presence that leaves others insecure because they do not know whether they have been accepted or ignored. Have you ever noticed how people respect those who speak less more? It's no coincidence. It's nature. Silence compels attention. It compels interpretation. It creates expectation. Those who speak little do not reveal their weaknesses. They do not leave emotional traces. They do not let others know where they can press. And for this reason, they are respected, even without asking for it. Because silence, when well constructed, is a veiled threat, not of violence, but of unpredictability. Imagine a work meeting. Everyone talks. They discuss. They present ideas. One of them just observes, silent, attentive, almost motionless. At the end, he says a sentence. Simple, direct, but it changes the direction of the entire discussion. His silence gave weight to the words. It created space for each gaze to turn more attentively. And that changes everything, because the power is not in the number of sentences. It is in their density, in the moment they are said, in the way they interrupt the ordinary flow of noise. The tension created by a silent mind is much harder to ignore than the constant noise of an anxious mind. Now think about the opposite. That person who talks too much, who tries to prove too much, who gives himself away between the lines, who gets offended quickly, who needs to justify himself, who seeks approval. Do you notice how, in a short time, he loses his authority? How he becomes background noise? That's what happens when you need to be understood all the time. You give up doubt. And when you give up doubt, you give up tension. And without tension, there is no respect. Because respect is born of care, and no one cares about something they already fully understand. Machiavelli said that a prince must always hide his intentions. But why? Because revealed intentions create paths, and paths can be anticipated, sabotaged, blocked. When you talk too much, you give away your next steps. When you reveal too much, you become predictable, and predictability is vulnerability. And too much visible vulnerability becomes an invitation to control, an invitation to disrespect, an invitation to be tested. But silence generates inferences, and inferences are constructions of others. They are projections, they are imaginations, they are doubts that grow inside the minds of others until they become respect. Because what cannot be predicted needs to be treated with caution. And caution is the mother of respect. And where there is respect, there is limit. And where there is limit, there is power. You can start applying this to the little things. Slow down the pace at which you respond. Don't rush to be understood. Say less. Observe more. When everyone is waiting for your opinion, deliver a pause. When everyone wants an emotional response, deliver neutrality. When everyone is quick, be slow. Not out of weakness, but out of calculation. Because calculation, when silent, seems like superior instinct, and superior instinct is mistaken for natural leadership. This is what Machiavelli would teach us today, if he were to walk among us. That you don't need to shout to be heard. You need to be missed. You need to become a selective presence. You need to leave space for others to ask themselves, what does he really think about me? Why didn't he say anything? Did he realize his mistake? Will he answer later? These questions are worth more than 1,000 explanations, because they keep your figure alive in the mind of others. Even when you've left the room, silence is like an undiagnosed wound. Everyone feels it, but no one knows exactly what it can cause. Silence is not absence. It is presence that demands interpretation. And that interpretation can last for days, weeks, months. And the longer it lasts, the more power you hold. Because power is not about direct control. It is about effortless influence. It is about undeclared weight. It is about what you provoke without touching, without shouting, without repeating. It is about the memory you build without having to repeat yourself 1,000 times. Have you ever noticed that the strongest characters in movies are almost never the ones who talk the most? They watch, they wait, they appear and disappear, and the whole scene revolves around them. It's no coincidence. It's because mystery activates the imagination. And the imagination is the most fertile stage for fear, respect, and fascination. Because the human mind doesn't tolerate blank spaces. It needs to fill them in. And the less you say, the more space it has to build versions of you. Stronger, more mysterious, more influential versions than any ready-made phrase could ever create. Machiavelli believed that lasting power does not lie in brute force. It lies in the careful construction of perception. And perception is narrative. And narrative is born of what is seen, but not explained. What is felt, but not confirmed. What is lived, but not concluded. That is the function of silence. To keep the script open. To keep the other person writing, even after you have stopped speaking. And the more they write, the more they become attached to your absence. And the more you become impossible to ignore. In the end, what's scary isn't what was said. It's what wasn't said. What's surprising isn't the shouting. It's the lack of it. What's unbalancing isn't the confrontation. It's the absence of it at the exact moment when everyone was expecting an attack. Because that's when the pattern is broken. And whoever breaks the pattern dominates the rhythm. Whoever dominates the rhythm changes the dance. And whoever changes the dance is the one who defines who dances and who watches. You don't have to be cold. You have to be strategic. You have to learn the weight of a pause, the power of an unanswered look, the impact of a contained presence. Because in the real world, where everyone is trying to be noticed, true power belongs to the one who can hide without ever ceasing to be felt. Because the one who does not reveal himself completely can never be completely defeated. And when you understand this, when you stop rushing to be understood and start moving to be interpreted with reverence, you will notice something strange. People will change their tone. Conversations will slow down. Looks will weigh more heavily. And you will realize it is no longer you who adapts to others. It is others who regulate themselves so as not to lose you. That is true power, the one that is born of silence and survives in memory. Because what has never been explained will never be forgotten. You don't need to be understood. You need to be considered. That's the turning point. The world tries to convince you that being understood is the key to connection. That if you're clear, transparent, and emotionally accessible, everything will flow. But the truth is that the more you give yourself away, the more people build a version of you that serves them, not you. And when you realize this, you realize that exposure doesn't protect you. It weakens you. Machiavelli knew this long before any modern psychology. He observed kings, generals, traitors, allies, and he understood something simple. Power does not lie in being worshipped. It lies in being carefully calculated. Human beings do not respect what they fully understand. They respect what they cannot predict. And then comes the paradox. The more you try to be clear, the more you become common. The more predictable, the more disposable. Because the predictable is comfortable and the comfortable is easily replaced. But the indefinable takes up space, even when it is absent. How many times have you been forgotten because you were too transparent? How many times have you been discarded after giving too much of yourself too quickly? How many times have you regretted saying something that, deep down, you knew you could have kept to yourself? The truth is, you don't have to be a complete mystery, but you do need to learn to modulate what you show and when you show it. You need to choose your words like you're positioning pieces on a warboard. You need to realize that the way others see you is a construct, and that you can shape that image without lying, just by measuring. Have you ever noticed how some people walk into a room and seem bigger than they really are? They're not prettier, smarter, or better dressed, but they carry an energy of control, and you don't know if you like them or if you fear something about them. This ambiguity is powerful, because where there's doubt, there's a tension. Have you ever noticed that there is something magnetic about unexplained contradiction? People who act compassionately one moment and coldly the next. People who demonstrate active listening but don't reveal anything about themselves. People who smile without giving in. People who give compliments but don't commit. This duality creates tension, and tension is what keeps people emotionally engaged. But how do you construct this without it seeming forced? How do you avoid falling into the artificial theater of calculated coldness? The answer lies in building an unstable presence. Not emotionally unstable, but narratively unstable. You show yourself and hide. You appear and then disappear. You deliver an idea but don't explain what you want with it. You leave a question hanging and then leave the room. You allow others to feel your presence but not your possession. Machiavelli did not believe in absolute control. He believed in control of perception. He did not want the prince to win by the sword. He wanted him to win by doubt, by building a character that no one would dare test, because they did not know what would happen if they crossed the line. Have you ever felt like someone respected you more after you didn't respond to a message, or when you failed to explain why you didn't show up somewhere? It's not magic. It's a lack of predictability. It's a broken expectation. It's a restrained presence that says more than any long-winded justification. And why does this work? Because human beings are programmed to look for patterns. When they don't find them, they freeze. They respect them. They adjust. Because the absence of a pattern activates the instinct for caution, and no one moves forward with force against something that can react in an unknown way. Now think. How many times have you given away your personality's instruction manual in your first conversations? How many times have you revealed your insecurities as a request for connection? How many times have you tried to be deciphered when you should have let yourself be felt? There is a kind of language that is not verbal. It is a language of rhythm, of pause, of omission. When you take a long time to respond, when you look and do not speak, when you listen and do not comment, you are speaking. You are saying, you do not have easy access. You are saying, my mind is not open territory. You are saying, if you want to understand me, you will have to earn it. And at that moment, something changes. The other person begins to adapt. He begins to measure his words. He begins to think before acting. Because now he knows you are not an available character. You are a territory up for negotiation. Machiavelli would never tell you to be unreachable, but he would tell you to be unstable enough that others are never sure where they stand. Because where there is no certainty, caution is born. And where caution is born, respect begins. Have you ever been with someone who seemed to have all the answers ready, who never seemed to hesitate, who seemed confident all the time? And have you ever felt like you were around that person, wanting to know what they think of you, even though they haven't said anything? That's the key. It's not about dominating the other person. It's about building a presence that invites interpretation. Because the more people try to interpret you, the more they connect with the image they're creating. And that image becomes more powerful than any explanation. What if you disappeared for a week and came back without explanation? What if you stopped justifying yourself in arguments? What if you stopped filling every silence with words? What would happen to the image others have of you? The initial discomfort would come, but soon after curiosity would come. Speculation, doubt, and doubt is the beginning of lasting respect, because what is not over continues to be analyzed. Have you ever noticed how people try harder for people who don't give guarantees? How they try to impress people who don't respond right away? How they seek approval from people who don't easily validate? This isn't about playing with other people's feelings. It's about moving from a position of need to a position of value. Value is not asserted. It is imposed by what you don't do, by what you don't respond, by what you refuse, by what you hold on to, by what you deny. And every denial is a reminder. You are not available for any kind of access. You cannot be bought with attention, praise, or drama. How many times have you shown your presence as if it were an obligation? How many times have you responded too quickly, even when you were uncomfortable? How many times have you remained silent out of insecurity, not strategy? The silence that imposes value is not passive silence. It is the silence that comes from decision, from consciousness, from the presence that observes more than it delivers, that questions more than it proves, that chooses to be felt, not invaded. Machiavelli would write, "Do not show your soul to anyone who has not yet shown you respect, because the soul, once read without reverence, becomes banal, and everything that is banalized loses the right to protection. Your unpredictability is not a flaw, it is an asset. Your well-placed silence is not a weakness, it is a wall. Your strategic absence, your emotional rhythm, your restraint, all of it communicates, all of it protects, all of it builds. The question now is, how long will you allow yourself to be read like an open book? How long will you let transparency erase the tension that your name should carry? You don't have to be a ghost, but you do have to become a field of presence that changes the environment without needing to be explained. A field of perception that silences the hasty, that forces others to pay attention. Because when you become undefinable, you become unforgettable. And the unforgettable in the human mind is never the loudest. It is the one that leaves the most questions open. At first you think that being noticed is a matter of speaking well, having charisma, or mastering a specific talent. But over time you realize that the most influential people are almost never the most talkative. They are the most disciplined. And this discipline is not physical. It is psychological. It is an invisible repetition of habits that build presence before anyone even hears your voice. Machiavelli was not talking about charm. He was talking about control. And the greatest control of all is self-control. Have you ever walked into a room and felt someone was there before you even saw them? It was as if the air had changed, as if the energy had focused in a specific direction. This doesn't happen by chance. Presence is built long before the body enters. It is the sum of small choices repeated in silence every day. And almost always, it is born from what you don't do. Think about the little habits of power. What happens when someone provokes you and you simply don't react? What happens when everyone is justifying themselves and you are silent? What happens when everyone wants to talk and you just listen? Your lack of impulse becomes presence. Your silence becomes heaviness. Your restraint becomes tension. And tension is unspoken respect. A study by Harvard University revealed that people who pause for 2 seconds before responding are perceived as more intelligent, even when they say the same thing as others. Why? Because silence before speaking suggests that there has been processing, control, and calm. And this activates an unconscious association in the other person's mind. Those who speak later think better. Those who think better lead. Machiavelli would understand this perfectly. He would write, "Hasty speech is the sister of weakness, not because haste is always a mistake, but because the need to respond quickly betrays anxiety. It betrays insecurity. And real power never manifests itself in anxiety. It manifests itself in stability. Powerful people are not always available. They don't react to everything. They don't comment on everything. They don't correct everyone. And they don't defend themselves easily. This lack of response creates an invisible barrier. And this barrier requires others to position themselves more carefully. Because they don't know where the line is. And when you don't know where the line is, every move demands attention. Now imagine the opposite. That person who is always present, always giving their opinion, always justifying themselves. At first, they seem approachable, but over time, they become invisible. Because everything that is constant becomes a landscape. Everything that is predictable loses value. And everything you give before being asked for loses weight. In a social experiment conducted in New York, actors were instructed to enter busy coffee shops and sit in silence, without using their cell phones, without interacting, just observing. The result? In less than 5 minutes, most of the people around them changed their behavior. They spoke more quietly, avoided eye contact, and looked discreetly. Why? Because silent presence activates the group's self-regulation. An active observer, even without declared authority, changes the dynamics. Because conscious silence always carries a question. What does he know that I don't? Machiavelli would call this a strategic presence, one that does not impose itself with volume, but with density. And density is not built with speech. It is built with practice, with small habits that transform the ordinary into the symbolic. Habit 1. Never be the first to react. When someone provokes you, corrects you, challenges you, wait. Not because you don't feel it, but because the person who reacts first is always seen as less dominant. The pause is a micro-gesture of dominance, and in social theater, response time communicates status. Habit 2. Speak more slowly. Not because it's pretty, but because it changes the perception of everyone around you. A University of Michigan study found that leaders who speak 15% slower are perceived as more confident, and listeners' brains retain more of what's said. It's as if speaking slowly conveys authority, without having to change the content. Machiavelli would write, "He who commands the pace, commands the narrative." Habit 3. Say less than expected. Because in a world where everyone exaggerates, what is restrained gains weight. Restraint becomes a symbol of self-control, and self-control, in the social game, is confused with power. You can see this in meetings, dinners, interviews. Those who speak little but punctuate accurately are always heard more. Habit 4. Leave before you're saturated. Learn to leave places before they take your presence for granted. Machiavelli didn't want followers. He wanted impact, and impact is memory. But memory only records what hasn't been repeated until it loses its flavor. When you withdraw at the height of your presence, you create absence with weight, and absence with weight becomes presence in the mind of the other. Because what is not finished is not forgotten. These habits are not for manipulation. They are for protecting your depth. Because without discipline, your essence becomes a commodity for common use. And everything that is for common use is treated as a resource, not as influence. Machiavelli knew that the game of power was, in fact, the game of perception, and that the most lasting perception is that which is born of contrast. The contrast between what is said and what is hidden, between what is constant and what is rare, between what is given and what is denied. This contrast creates magnetism, and magnetism in social theater always overcomes noise. Have you ever noticed how people stop laughing when someone doesn't laugh? How they tone it down when they realize someone isn't reacting? How they rephrase their thoughts when someone doesn't give any clues about what they're thinking? This silent power is available. It just requires consistency. And this consistency is born of rituals. Imagine that. Upon entering a room, your presence made others adjust their posture, lower their tone, observe their own gestures. This is not vanity. It is a sign that your energy imposes regulation, not by force, but by the repetition of behavioral choices that demand more from others without asking for anything. Your silent presence demands that others perform. And this, Machiavelli knew, is the root of authority. When others change because of you, without you having to ask. This presence is not built in grand acts. It is formed in details, in the times you choose, in the way you walk, in the way you listen, in the type of silence you deliver, in the moments when you decide not to correct, not to defend, not to repeat, not to explain yourself. Each of these choices is a brick, and when added together, they build an invisible architecture around your name. In the end, what separates the powerful from the forgettable is not talent. It is the set of silent habits they practice when no one is looking. Because all respect begins with consistency, and true consistency does not seek applause. It repeats itself even in silence. Machiavelli wouldn't have social media, but if he did, he probably wouldn't post. Because his strength would be in what's not said, what's not shown, what's not delivered. Because in a world that sells for clicks, what's hidden becomes a relic, and what's a relic is always worth more. It is possible to dominate someone without saying a word. It is possible to change the behavior of an entire group without giving an order. It is possible to make people think about you for days without them knowing exactly why. And it all starts with a simple detail. You have become an absence that weighs heavily. Machiavelli understood this long before behavioral psychology. He knew that human beings respond more to what they do not understand than to what they understand completely. When there is complete clarity, there is comfort. But where there is a gap, there is reflection. And too much reflection becomes obsession. You will never be remembered intensely if you are easy to understand. You will be remembered if your absence causes imbalance, if your silence creates questions, if your withdrawal reorganizes the emotional structure of those who remain. Most people think that making an impact is a matter of presence. But what really changes an environment is not the person who shows up with force, but the person who disappears and leaves a mark. It's that look that never came back, that sentence that didn't end, that answer that never came, that expectation that was created and frustrated. Because what is completed ends, but what is interrupted lives in mental repetition. You've probably experienced this before. Someone who didn't answer you, someone who left without saying anything, someone who looked at you for a few seconds too many and then looked away, and it stayed in your mind like an echo. You tried to ignore it, but it came back. You tried to rationalize it, but it came back. You tried to forget it, but the absence took the form of presence. The name for this experience is an indirect psychological bond, a bond created not by affection, but by unresolved tension. This is the root of the psychology of deep respect, when the other person's mind carries you even without your participation, and the further you move away, the more the image they left of you grows, because now it is based on projection, not on facts. And every projection for the human brain is stronger than memory. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who are rejected in an ambiguous way are remembered more than those who give clear, even negative responses. This means that strategic silence is more likely to retain their memory than any open discussion. And this applies to relationships, negotiations, leadership, friendships, and even status disputes. Machiavelli would not suggest silence as a punishment. He would suggest silence as a tool, because silence, when positioned with precision, becomes an invisible threat, not because you are going to do something, but because the other person cannot predict whether you will. Doubt is always more powerful than certainty. Certainty limits. Doubt multiplies possibilities. Have you ever stopped to notice how people behave when you change the pace of communication? When you respond late, when you respond with less emotion, when you respond neutrally. When you don't respond at all, they change their tone. They ask questions, they analyze you, they go back to topics you've already closed. They revisit conversations looking for signs. It's the human brain trying to close an open narrative, but the story goes on, and that's uncomfortable. And discomfort generates attention, and prolonged attention generates respect, even if it's not acknowledged. The big secret is to understand that you don't need to threaten anyone directly. Just allow your unpredictability to exist as a possibility. When you don't react as expected, you force them to recalculate. When you disappear without justifying yourself, you create doubt. When you don't deliver emotions, you force others to feel theirs. And this reflection, this mirror, this discomfort is called silent emotional authority. Imagine a leader who rarely raises his voice, but whose opinion carries more weight than the words of others. He doesn't need to impose himself. People adjust their posture when he enters. They look before they speak. They react before he says anything. This kind of influence is born from a history of restraint, of pauses, of distancing, of silences, and each absence he has constructed has added up to form a symbol that his reaction is not guaranteed, that his affect is not obvious, that his presence is volatile, and for that very reason, precious. You can apply this without being manipulative. You can apply it to every conversation, to every gesture. Say less than you can. Disappear when you are expected to stay. Listen when you are expected to speak. And see what happens. People will start to reorganize the way they interact with you. Not because you changed what you said, but because you changed what you didn't say. Machiavelli wrote, "The prince must be feared so that if he is not loved, he is at least respected." Respect is born of limits, and limits are born of uncertainty. If everyone knows how you act, they think they know you. And those you think you know stop observing, stop adjusting, stop offering the best. But if no one is sure of what you think, what you want, what you intend to do, everyone remains in a state of alert. And this state of alert is the fertile ground for respect, because no one dares to hurt what they do not understand. No one attacks what they cannot measure. No one challenges what does not react. This game is invisible. And precisely for that reason, it is the most powerful. You don't fight with words, you fight with silence. You don't protect yourself with shouting. You protect yourself with absence. You don't respond with arguments. You respond with partial presence. Have you ever been with someone who, even without speaking, changed the dynamics of the environment? Who, by simply existing, changed everyone's behavior? This is the pinnacle of influence. When your silent existence becomes a factor of external emotional regulation. And this is built with time, with discipline, with retreats, with denials, with the constant refusal to be understood too easily. Social psychology shows that human beings are obsessed with closure. When a situation is too open, they suffer. And to avoid suffering, they try to resolve it. But when they can't resolve it, they fixate. They repeat themselves. They cling. And what should be just a name, a memory, a conversation, becomes a symbol. And symbols have a long life, because the symbol represents what could have been, what was not said, what was not confirmed, what was felt but never explained. And this active void, this emotional hole, becomes what weighs the most. You don't have to hide from the world, but you have to understand that showing everything is the opposite of impact. Impact requires imbalance, and imbalance requires variation. Show sometimes, talk sometimes, explain sometimes, but never deliver a complete pattern. Never be everything. Never become a total character. Because when you disappear and your absence is felt, you cease to be a person. You become a reference. And every reference lives longer than the body that originated it. Because reference does not depend on presence. It depends on meaning. And meaning is built in the gaps, in the pauses, in the between the lines. And that is what you need to cultivate. Machiavelli would not be afraid of silence. He would be afraid of being easy to read. He would be afraid that others would think they knew everything about him, because at that moment, he would cease to be an authority figure. He would become just another one. And nothing is more dangerous for someone who wants respect than becoming just another one. The human mind respects what it does not surrender. It loves what it does not understand. It obeys what it does not know how it will react. And that is where its power lies. Not in what you say, but in what you refuse. And when you understand that, you'll realize that it was never about winning with shouting. It was always about winning with the space you occupy, even when you're no longer there. There comes a time when you have to choose. Continue trying to be understood by everyone, or start being respected in silence. And this choice, contrary to what it may seem, does not require a sudden effort. It requires an internal realignment, a change in attitude, an intimate decision not to give in completely to the rush of the world. You've given too much of yourself. You've explained too much. You've waited for recognition from people who weren't ready to see you. You've been a constant presence in spaces that only realized your value after you left. And at some point, you need to stop trying to fit in. You need to start building a presence that is respected even when it's not explained. A presence that doesn't need to prove anything, but that still has weight. Still, it demands attention. Still, it leaves a mark. Machiavelli was not just a thinker of power. He was a surgeon of human nature. He understood that all real power comes from perception, and that the most powerful perception is not the one that puts you above others, but the one that forces others to recalculate their actions whenever they think they might underestimate you. This perception is not loud. It is subtle. It seeps silently between the lines of human interactions. This perception is built on the repetition of your silent behaviors. It is in the way you enter a room without needing to prove anything. It is in the way you listen without reacting, in the calm with which you refuse explanations, in the rhythm you impose with your presence, and above all, in the selective absence you offer as a response when you realize that your energy is not valued. Because those who know their own value do not despair in defending it. None of this happens overnight. It is a construction, an internal transformation that manifests itself in the simplest choices. And that is why now, at the end of it all, I want to give you a plan, a map, a practical path so that everything you have heard so far is not just inspiration, but action, that it leaves the realm of ideas and enters the realm of behavior, that it becomes practice, habit, nature. Strategic application plan. 1. Slow down your responses. Practice the power of the pause every day. When someone says something provocative, take 2 seconds to breathe before reacting. This alone changes the emotional dynamics. He who controls time controls space. He who controls silence controls the scene. 2. Adjust your speaking pace. Speak 20% slower than your natural impulse. This will communicate more confidence than any prepared speech. And it will make others pay attention without you having to impose yourself. Someone who speaks calmly conveys dominance. Someone who speaks without urgency conveys preparation. 3. Begin to withdraw before you are expected. From conversations, from groups, from environments. Leave the feeling that there was more to be seen. This creates a memorable absence and a desired future presence. Mystery only exists in that which is not completely closed. 4. Practice emotional neutrality. Don't be quick to reveal when something is affecting you. When everyone else is reacting, remain steady. This communicates quiet strength, and it intimidates effortlessly. Neutrality is perceived as emotional maturity, and maturity attracts respect. 5. Avoid unnecessary explanations. When you say no, just say it. When you change your mind, just change your mind. When you walk away, just walk away. What needs to be understood will be. What needs to be respected starts there. Your clarity should be in your actions, not in your justifications. 6. Take care of your exposure time. Don't be always available. Reduce the frequency with which you appear on social media, in groups, in messages. The scarcity of your presence is the first step towards it having real value. What is rare becomes precious. What is predictable becomes banal. 7. Create a daily ritual of strategic presence. It can be something as simple as observing for 5 minutes before speaking, responding only when you feel there is value, leaving places without warning. The consistency of these gestures silently shapes your image. Consistent behavior builds reputation effortlessly. 8. Document your progress. Keep a notebook or notepad where you write down your experiences. Write down when you chose silence and what the result was. This creates awareness and accelerates internalization. Self-analysis is the fuel for self-construction. 9. Be unpredictable in small doses. Don't always tell where you're going. Don't always say what you think. Leave room for interpretation, for doubt, for imagination. Predictability is the opposite of silent authority. 10. Observe the effects without intervening. See how others react to your change. Notice the micro-transformations, the tone, the look in their eyes, the response time of others. You will learn more about silent influence by observing than by trying to control. These steps are not magic formulas. They are foundations. They are daily rehearsals so that your energy becomes denser, more respected, more present. And the more you repeat them, the more you will begin to notice something subtle changing around you. People will start listening to you without you having to raise your voice. They will start observing you without you having to move. They will start respecting you without knowing exactly why. And that is when power stops being a quest. It becomes a reflection of the depth you have decided to cultivate in silence. Because real power does not need to be asserted. It only needs to be felt. And when it is felt, it does not need to be remembered. Because it continues to be present even in absence, even in silence, even when everything is over. Silent power is like a perfume that lingers in the environment, even when the person has already left. You've come this far because something in you was ready to change. Maybe you were tired of being read without depth. Maybe you were exhausted from explaining yourself to those who didn't want to understand. Maybe you were frustrated with the constant effort to be validated by a noisy presence. And now you know, it's not the volume that makes you unforgettable. It's the density of your absence. What matters is not how much you appear, but how much your absence is felt. From now on, your name does not need to be repeated. It needs to be considered. Your silence does not need to be defended. It needs to be felt. Your presence does not need to be memorized. It needs to be incorporated into the emotional memory of those who encounter you. You will no longer be remembered for what you said, but for what you caused when you said nothing. And that only happens when you decide to stop being predictable, when you decide to stop asking for space and start taking up the air, not with noise, but with tension, with pause, with silence, with the calm of someone who no longer needs to explain their own value. From the moment you trust the invisible impact of what refuses to be revealed, you change everything. You don't need to become someone else. You need to become more of yourself, the version of you that doesn't chase after you, that doesn't bend, that doesn't repeat itself, that doesn't justify itself, that doesn't give itself away on a silver platter. Because this version, the one that lives on the edge between presence and mystery, is the one that the world is beginning to respect in silence. This version is the one that carries, without saying it, a story, a strength, a code. If you felt the impact of these words, don't let them die in inspiration. Take this moment and turn it into practice. Choose now which habit you will apply first, and repeat it, firmly, constantly, with patience, because the human mind resists change, but it bends to strategic repetition, and strategic repetition becomes identity. And when she bows, you won't need to say anything else, because your presence will speak for you every day, in every environment, in every memory you inhabit without even needing to be present. And in that moment, you will have stopped seeking respect. You will have become respect itself in human form. If this touched you in any way, subscribe to the Deep Psyche channel. Like this video if it sparks something in you. And comment below, even if anonymously, about what you felt, what you experienced, or what you intend to change from now on. Your experience may be the reflection someone needs to see their own journey. Because this journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning. And your presence starts now.